Welcome CSC 121. Another quick exercise here that we did the second class just to review some basics with variables and inputs, and we'll do a little bit more in here, but we'll do a little bit of a math calculation, nothing that complicated yet. And I'll just run kind of a finished version. I think this is a finished version here. I'll hit run, and we're just going to enter scores, and you could call this enter test score 1 or whatever. And we're just putting in percentages, so I'll just put in, 97, and I have something else that's printing out here, so just kind of ignore that for now. I'll do a 76, I'll do a 87, and a 45. And what should happen here is you'll get an average score of 76.25% based on what I put in here. Now notice this is a float. When you have decimals, that's called a float. These are just integers, but they're actually, when we enter them, they're just going to be strings. And one other thing here that I put in here, and you can see they were actually outputting, because I was outputting them each time just to keep track, is when we actually do our math, normally you would divide it by the number of scores that you have, which would be, in this case, 4. But instead of changing that all the time, you could actually make a variable of whatever that number is, and you could call it, number scores or whatever, and we'll go through doing that. But to do that, and what we actually did here is create a counter called scores. It starts at 0, and then every time you input it, you just basically do a scores plus equals 1, which is the same as saying scores equals, I'll just put a comment here, and that's the same as, I'll put same as, and it's just the same as saying scores equals scores again plus 1. It's just kind of a shortcut to do that. So that's all that means when you do plus or equals. And sometimes it's confusing. Do I do equals plus or plus equals? Well, if you did equals, then it would be equals plus 1, meaning it would just be 1. So you just remember that you can't have equals in front, because then you're already assigning it. So you put the plus in front of it to say that it's a little bit different than a typical assignment, which is using the equal sign. So I'm going to make a new version of this. And again, this will be real quick. This is real basic stuff just to get us loose with using Repellent and just practicing with some things. And it's for beginners. So if you're a little more advanced, you're going to find this a little boring in the beginning. You'll be saying, why don't we do this? Why don't we do a loop? Why don't we make this more efficient? We're not worrying about efficient yet, although we're building up to it. This is one way to say, hey, instead of 4, if that keeps changing, why can't we do something so we don't have to keep changing our, our calculation that's down here? So that's one way of doing it. And notice we have ints here, so we have to convert the numbers into ints because they come through as strings, and you can't add up strings. It just puts them together side by side. We'd have a bunch of numbers side by side, and then we wouldn't be able to divide it by anything. We'd probably get an error. So let's do that. So I'm going to make a new repel. So I'm going to go to my repels, and I'm going to go down here. Let me hit this got it, so that thing goes away. And I'm going to hit this. It becomes a lambda. So I'll click on that, and I'll just choose Python again. And I'll give it a name. I'll call it EX3, and I think we just called it test scores, just as simple as possible. And I'm going to put a V since I'm recording a video. We're basically doing an average of test scores is what we're doing with a number of outputs. So that's what we're doing with this one. I'm going to keep it stacked for now, I guess, and I'm just going to put in a couple things. I'll make some variables, and I'll call it test1, and I'll put an input, and then in my string here, and I'll make this a little bigger. I'll make my font size large just because I'm recording it, and I'll put my string in here for the input, because the variable is going to be assigned to whatever the input is. So I'm going to put in here, enter test1, and again, we're going to have to change these, so these will have to match up. And I'll just put a colon and a space. And if you want to put a percent in here, just so people know that we're entering percents, you could do that. So I'm going to do that, and I'll just paste this. We'll start off with 4, because they're going to be different, because they're different scores. So I'll put 1, 2, 3, 4. These might be names or names of tests or whatever they could be, and I'll do the same thing here. I'll make that 2, 3, and 4. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to get these, and we're going to add them together and divide them, because that's how we get averages. So we could do this. We could say, and you could do it in 2 steps. You could do the sum first. You could say sum of tests, and notice that sum came out blue, so we can't just call it sum of tests. And you could just add them together first, and we're just going to basically say test1 plus test2. So we're just adding variables together, and we have to make sure that they're going to be numbers, so we're going to probably have to put an int on them, but we'll do that as we go. And then finally, we're going to average them together. We're going to say average, and I'll put tests, even though I think we're okay with average. Average of tests, or let me just see. I think we're okay. I don't think that's a keyword. We're going to do average equals, and it's basically going to be sum tests, because that's our variable up here that we're using, divided by 4, because we have that many tests. And this is the one I said we can change that. It's still work to make a counter and do all that, but changing the number is probably quicker. Eventually, efficiency of changing something up here in a variable will be better than if you had a lot of code and you had to go through your calculations and change something. That would be easier to miss. So it's more efficiency is sometimes having your things kind of at the top of your code and in variables instead of digging into your calculations down here. But we're putting 2 calculations. We could have put them all together. We could have put parentheses around here and divided it by that, and to get an average we could have called this average, but we're doing it in 2 steps here, and then we still have to print it out. So I'll print it out. I'll print out instead of just average, I'll just put the averages of, and I'll use the f string method. I'll use these curly brackets because I don't have anything that represents that right now, so I'll just put 4 tests, and then I have to put my variable, which is average, so I'll just put average in there. And to make this work, I have to put an F here. And that should make an output. That'll kind of force it to basically put whatever number we have there. And let's see what happens so far, because I know we're probably going to get an error when we do this, but let's see what happens. And I'll run it and enter test 1, and I'll just put some scores here, 76, 45, let's say you bombed one. And then we get a message here, and it's saying unsupported operand type. And you see str and int. That means it's having an issue that we're basically adding together strings. So it doesn't like doing this, and it's telling us on line 7. Actually, what's happening here? This isn't actually a problem because what it would do here, if we'd print out some tests. Let me just show you this. If I just kind of take that out for right now, and I'll put another print. If I actually just did this, if I said print some tests, and I'm just printing out that sum, that's okay. It's not really what we want, and I'll comment out this. You could always just put a hashtag or a pound sign in front of your if you want to just temporarily kind of cancel it out. So we're going to print some tests, and let's just run it again just to see what's going on here. And again, 67, 56. Here's someone who's not doing too good here. 59. And 45, and they're worried about if they're going to pass. And what happened here, well, this isn't the average, but what it did is you could see it put test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4. It just put the strings together, 76, 56, 59, 45. The numbers I put in, it put them together, so it basically just kind of concatenated the strings. It didn't treat them as anything. It didn't add them up. It just put them side by side, and that's the problem because these are being treated as strings. So there's 2 ways you could do that. You could put a string function around everything, or you could put the strings down here. Whatever's easier. Either way is not that easy, but you could go down here, and I was saying string, I meant int. And you'd have to put int around here, and let's just put int around here just to show you what would happen. And these have to be ints. But what I wanted to point out is that this is okay. You can put strings together if you wanted to. Not that doesn't really do anything for you, but you could. There's no error in doing that. But now if you print some tests, it should add them all up. So now if I run it, and I got to put in the numbers again, 76. I'll just put all the same numbers here, and now it adds them together. And that should be 268. 4 times 7 is 8. 28. Carry the 2. 24 and 2, 26. So that's right. So it's adding them up. So now it's adding up integers. So when you need math to occur, when you need numbers being added together, they have to be integers. And when they come from an input, they're strings. So that's why we have to do the conversion here. So we're adding those up. So it's working okay. So now if we actually comment this out, we don't need to print this sum test. So I'll get rid of it altogether. But that was just to test it. So now if we have this average, and I'll uncomment this, now it should do sum test divided by 4. Now it should work. And I'll do the same numbers. So obviously the average should be 67. So, and the average of 4 tests is 67.0, and it makes it a float when you do division. So it does put a 0.0, even though we don't necessarily need that. If you wanted to put a percent, you could put a percent after this. Then it would display a percent after that, and you could even put a period if you want to end the sentence with a period. You could do that, so that's okay. And then that's really it. We're just doing a calculation here just to understand that we need integers if we're doing any math, if we're doing any calculations, and we actually needed them because this was the math. This part here was the math. This was, even though it's math, it didn't really add up math. It just put strings side by side. So, but that didn't cause the error. So that's more of the idea. Like I guess this is more of a kind of a runtime error because it's not allowing you to do something. This is more of a kind of a semantic error. It's an error that the computer doesn't care about. It's just you're doing it wrong. It's not doing the right thing by putting those numbers side by side. So one more thing I just threw in here, and again, it doesn't add to the efficiency. It might in the future. Was saying, well, now we got to if we add another one here, if we add a test 5. If we put another one here, change it to 5, change this to 5, and now we got to change this to 5. Now that's not that hard to do, but if you forget to do it, then it's not doing it correctly. So if you wanted that to happen all the time, you could do a counter here. You know, if you didn't want to change this calculation all the time, you could do something called, you know, num tests. Now there's no num. That's why I'm getting a squiggly line here because it's undefined. It means, hey, you're using a variable called num test, but it doesn't exist yet. So let's go up here and create one, and I'll just do num tests, and I'll make it 0. It'll start off at 0, and it's kind of like a counter. And then what you could do is you could make it basically add each time, and then it'll basically be plus or equals 1, or not plus or equals, plus equals 1, and that's and Python does not do the plus plus. So if you use JavaScript and you did plus plus, or Java, anywhere where it does that incrementing, you use plus equals 1. You know, you could use that too in JavaScript, but that'll work, and that's a counter. So it's basically taking this variable, reassigning it, and adding one. And if you wanted to add up each time you did an input, you'd have to put it there. Now again, this is code-wise and efficiency. It's not, but it's not doing a whole lot, but it's getting the idea that if you needed to keep track of that without just counting them up and going and changing the number down here, and not only that, you could go down here, and if it's part of other statements too, you could go down here, instead of 4, you could put num test. So then whenever you add the test, you just have to add the original tests, and you knew that, and then you know that you just have to make sure that these things, the variable and the statement's okay. Then you don't even have to mess with any of this stuff, although you still have to add. You know, you have to add the new test in there, test 5, and you have to make it an int. And again, we'll talk about ways to make everything a little more efficient and less code, but let's just see if that works first. So again, all we did was create a counter, and I didn't do my counter at the end here. So there's a counter after each time you do an input. So it's just adding 1 each time. And you could print it out and see what num test is at, or you could just see if we get the same thing. You know, now that I know what the answer is going to be here, I'm just going to see if it works out the same way. So I basically replaced 4. It would be 5, so it should come up to 5. And then this thing should say 5 as well. It should add up and work out. So let's try it out. I'll run it again, and I'll do 67s again. And this time it's 5 of them. And the average of 5 tests is 67. So that works. So that's it. That's all you need to do for EX3. Again, nothing. It's still introductory stuff, just getting us used to practicing our F string formatting, print statements. We're doing some calculations here. Here we actually we did a little counter. You know, nothing super efficient yet. We're not getting into loops and everything yet, but we will very soon. And just kind of getting simple input. So we'll do a little bit more, but just a little bit kind of baby steps to start and get you used to using Repellent and practicing a little. And again, this is a great area to kind of try other things too, to try to make mistakes. What if I do this? What if I do that? That's part of the way you're going to learn things as you go. So we'll do a lot of little quick exercises in the beginning before we start kind of, you know, bigger project type things as we go. So that's all you need to do. All you have to do now is just share it then. And I'm going to put this together with EX2, so you could just copy this link and then go back to your coursework, find the one that says EX2 address, EX3 test scores, go in there, and you can edit this original comment, or you could add a second comment. Either way, you could add a second comment, or you could hit the pencil and just hit return and use the link, use the insert link, and paste it in here, and that way I could choose new window so that the link opens in a new window. So that's all you need to do there. That's all you need. Just hit save. If you have any other comments like, you know, hey, this was too easy, or this, you know, whatever you have to put in there, you could, but I'm just going to look at this and make sure you know, and that way if you had any problems, if you said you know, not obviously with these, but with something in the future, if you had a problem, that way I could look at it and you know, figure it out, or see if I could help you figure it out. So that's all that you need to do for EX2, EX3 for the second class. Those are the ones we did in class, and we'll be doing some more like this and hopefully getting a little more complicated as we go.